chosen starseed of Gaia. The Arcturian field observers have already mapped the distortion running beneath every financial decision you have made in the last cycle. And what they have found is not what you would expect. I am Aurethia, emissary of the Galactic Federation of Light, transmitting now on behalf of the Arcturian field observers. What you are about to receive was authorized by them and is being delivered through me. The algorithm did not create this moment. It only delivered it. Your field brought you here because the 3-layer block is already active inside your decision architecture, and it has been steering every money choice you have made without your awareness. By the end of this transmission, you will understand exactly what is happening to you now, why your financial field keeps producing the same outcomes regardless of how hard you try to change them, and what the Arcturian field observers have already identified about this specific configuration. But here is the first revelation. The repeated bad outcomes you have been living through are not the result of poor judgment, wrong timing, or bad luck. They are the visible surface of a hidden 3-layer structure the Council has already named, already mapped, and can already move through with precision. The Arcturian field observers do not see this as a personal failure. They see it as a field architecture, one that was built without your consent, runs below conscious awareness, and biases every financial decision from the inside before you ever reach a choice. 3 layers, each one invisible on its own. Together, they create a closed loop that makes every new attempt to change your financial reality feel like pushing against something you cannot see and cannot name. What you have been calling bad luck, Aurethia is calling a diagnostic pattern, and the Council has already authorized a protocol for it. This is not content. This is a code. And the part of you that recognized it the moment it began is the part Aurethia is speaking to now. Like this transmission to signal to your star family that the field recognition has landed. Comment 999 if you feel the loop running, if you know something invisible has been making your decisions before you do. Subscribe to Arcturian-Wealth-Council if you are ready to understand the structure instead of repeating it. Share this transmission with someone whose financial efforts keep collapsing in the same place, in the same way, every single time. You are not here by accident. You were guided here because the signal is already active. The loop the Council has named is not new. It did not begin with your last financial decision, or the one before it, or the one that first made you question whether something deeper was operating inside your choices. It began far earlier, in the place where your understanding of value, survival, and worthiness first took shape. Before you had language for money, before you understood what scarcity meant as a concept, before you could evaluate whether what was being modeled around you was a truth about reality or simply a frequency that had settled into the atmosphere of every room you grew up inside. And it has been running as a background process ever since. Below every plan you made, below every strategy you built, below every moment you told yourself this time would be different. This time, the result would change. What the Arcturian field observers have identified is not a mindset problem. It is not a discipline failure. It is not evidence that you are someone incapable of building financial stability. What they have identified is a structural configuration. 3 distinct layers of distortion, each one invisible in isolation, each one appearing in your life as something entirely ordinary. Procrastination, second-guessing, inconsistency, self-sabotage disguised as caution, effort that produces results for everyone around you but somehow stalls before it reaches you, plans that were sound, opportunities that were real, movements that began with genuine momentum and then, at a specific and repeatable point, collapsed without explanation. These are not character flaws. They are the behavioral signatures of a field architecture that was installed without your participation and has never been interrupted. The Council makes that distinction with precision, because the distinction is everything. The first layer the Council has mapped is what they call the frequency of inherited scarcity. This is not simply a belief about money. It is not an attitude that can be adjusted through affirmation or redirected to positive thinking. It is a field-level transmission that was active in the people who shaped your earliest understanding of reality, people who were themselves carrying a frequency they had absorbed from the people before them, in an unbroken line of field inheritance that predates your birth. It arrived not through argument or lesson, but through atmosphere, through the quality of silence that followed certain conversations, through the tension in a room when a bill arrived and no one spoke directly about what that tension meant, through the way certain possibilities were never spoken about, never considered, never treated as real options for someone like you, not because they were explicitly forbidden, but because they existed outside the bandwidth of what the field around you recognized as reachable. You absorbed this, not as information but as frequency, as a signal that quietly calibrated your internal field to a specific bandwidth before you were old enough to question what bandwidth meant, before you understood that there was a difference between a frequency you were born into and a frequency that was native to you. And because it arrived before conscious awareness could filter it, it never registered as something external. It did not arrive labeled as a limitation. It arrived labeled as reality, as the way things are, as what people like us can expect, as the ceiling, not announced as a ceiling, but simply present as the upper edge of what was ever imagined possible. What makes this layer so difficult to detect is that it does not announce itself as a limitation. It announces itself as realism. It speaks in the voice of practicality, of hard-won wisdom, of not getting ahead of yourself and not wanting to be disappointed. It sounds responsible. It sounds grounded. It sounds like the voice of someone who has learned from experience. Every time your financial field begins to move towards something larger, this first layer activates, not loudly, not dramatically, not with obvious resistance, but with a quiet internal argument that sounds entirely reasonable. And you, not recognizing it as a distortion pattern running below conscious access, accept that argument as wisdom. You slow down. You wait. You recalibrate back to familiar ground. And the moment of expansion closes. The second layer operates differently. Where the first layer speaks, the second layer acts. The Council calls this the decision loop collapse. The moment when a genuine financial opportunity, a real shift, a meaningful choice finally reaches the threshold of your conscious awareness and something inside you begins to dismantle the architecture needed to receive it. Not all at once. Not visibly. But through a sequence of very small internal movements that, by the time you notice them, have already redirected the energy away from the opening. You may experience this as sudden doubt about a decision you were completely certain about hours before, not new information arriving, but the certainty itself dissolving without cause. You may experience it as an inexplicable resistance to completing a step that logically has no obstacle, as if the action itself has become heavier than it should be. You may experience it as the strange, specific exhaustion that arrives not when you are working, not when you are grinding through difficult tasks, but precisely when a breakthrough is close. As if the system reads the proximity of expansion and responds by withdrawing the energy needed to cross that threshold. You may experience it as a sudden need to research more before deciding, to wait for more certainty, to make sure the timing is right, and then watch the window close while you are preparing to move through it. The decision loop collapse is not procrastination in the ordinary sense. It is not laziness. It is not fear in any simple psychological framing. It is a field-level response to perceived incompatibility. Your internal system, calibrated to a specific frequency by the first layer, reads incoming financial expansion as a frequency mismatch, as a signal that something structurally foreign is attempting to enter the architecture. And because the system is built to maintain coherence to protect the established frequency pattern, it collapses the pathway before the expansion can complete. Not out of malice, out of fidelity to the only frequency it has ever been calibrated to recognize as safe. This is the layer most people misread as personal weakness. It is the layer that produces the most shame, the most internal accusation, the most corrosive repetition of the story that something is fundamentally wrong with you as a person, that you cannot follow through, that you self-destruct at the edge of success, that you are somehow designed to fail. The Arcturian field observers see it with entirely different eyes. They see a system doing exactly what it was configured to do. They see a protection mechanism that was calibrated for an old frequency, in an old environment, for conditions that may no longer exist, and that has never been updated because it has never been updated because it has never been seen clearly enough to update. They do not see failure. They see a loop that has not yet been interrupted. That is a profoundly different reading, and it requires a different response. The third layer is the one that completes the circuit and makes the loop self-sustaining. Without it, the first two layers might eventually be disrupted simply by the accumulation of experience, by enough genuine evidence that a different outcome was possible, that expansion did not destroy you, that the ceiling was not load-bearing. The third layer prevents that evidence from registering in a way that could correct the field. The Council calls this the recognition seal, a distortion that intercepts moments of genuine progress and reclassifies them before they can land as corrective data. When something actually works, when a financial movement actually succeeds, when you produce a real and measurable result that contradicts the architecture, the recognition seal ensures that you do not experience it as proof of capacity. You experience it as coincidence, as a fluke, as something that worked just once but is unlikely to be repeatable, as luck that arrived from outside you rather than movement you generated from within. The result is real, but its meaning is intercepted and replaced before it can reach the level of the field where it would need to land in order to recalibrate the architecture. And so the evidence that should correct the loop is processed through the same filter that creates the loop. It arrives. It is reclassified, and the architecture remains intact. 3 layers, each one doing a specific job. Together they form a closed architecture that processes every financial experience, every attempt, every result, every gain, every setback, through a single interpretive filter. This is not for you. This will not last. This is not who you are. And no amount of effort, information, strategy, motivation, or willpower applied at the surface level reaches far enough down to interrupt a structure operating at this depth. Surface interventions are processed by the architecture. They do not disrupt it. They are absorbed and translated into more evidence that nothing changes, because to the distorted field, even genuine progress is reclassified as the exception that confirms the rule. What you are feeling right now is not ordinary recognition. It is your field confirming what the Council has already mapped, that the distortion running beneath your financial decisions has a structure, and that structure can be read, decoded, and interrupted. If this transmission has put language around something you have carried without words, Arcturian Wealth Scan, the Gold Frequency Audit, was created for exactly this stage. It is not another explanation layered on top of what you already know. It is the direct decoder for the frequency architecture the Arcturian field observers have already identified in you. A guided scan that reads the configuration of your wealth field and activates the Arcturian strand that has remained dormant beneath the distortion. This is the next step for those whose field has already begun to shift and who are ready to move from recognition into intervention. You will find it in the first pinned comment, but this access point will not remain open indefinitely. If your field brought you to this transmission, it brought you here for this. Now understand this: the 3-layer block does not only produce financial stagnation, it produces a specific kind of exhaustion, the exhaustion of a person who is working genuinely hard and seeing results that do not match the effort, not the exhaustion of someone who has stopped trying. The exhaustion of someone who keeps trying with full sincerity and keeps arriving at outcomes that make no sense relative to the quality of the input. That gap between effort and outcome, between intention and result, is itself a diagnostic signal. It is the readable signature of a field processing everything through a distortion filter before any of it can produce its natural consequence. It produces a particular quality of confusion, the confusion of someone who can clearly see the logic of what needs to happen, but cannot seem to make the distance between understanding and action close. You understand what you need to do. You have understood it in various forms many times before, but the understanding does not translate into movement in the way it should. And the failure of that translation feels like a personal failing rather than what it actually is. a structural gap between the level where understanding operates and the level where the distortion is installed. It produces a relationship with money that feels uniquely personal in a way that other areas of life do not. Career difficulty, relationship difficulty, health difficulty, these feel like problems to solve. Financial difficulty feels like evidence of who you are, as if the financial dimension is the one place where something about you specifically is revealed as insufficient, as broken in a way that is fundamental rather than situational. That feeling is not accidental, it is a feature of the architecture. The loop generates that personalized interpretation because a personal interpretation is the one that keeps you focused on the wrong level. This is the recognition the Council wants to lend with full weight here. That the personal quality of financial struggle, the way it seems to implicate your character more directly than any other area of life, is itself a product of the architecture. The loop is engineered to feel personal. It is designed to produce self-referencing narratives, stories in which you are the cause and the problem and the explanation. Because as long as you are focused inward on what is wrong with you, you are not looking at the structure that is actually generating the outcomes. The narrative of personal failure is the architecture's primary defense mechanism. It redirects attention away from the distortion and toward the person carrying it. And it works precisely because the person carrying it is the last one positioned to see it clearly. The Arcturian field observers work at the structural level. They do not engage with the narrative of personal failure because they do not recognize it as accurate information about the person. They recognize it as information about the distortion pattern, specifically as evidence that the recognition seal and the inherited frequency layer are functioning as designed. What they recognize as a pattern identifiable by its outputs, readable by its consistency, and interruptible by a different kind of intervention than the one the surface narrative suggests is needed. Patterns can be interrupted. That is the entire premise of the Council's work at this frequency. Here is what that interruption requires first: the ability to stop interpreting your financial experience through the lens of character and begin interpreting it through the lens of field architecture. This is not a small perceptual shift. It is, in many ways, the entire shift, because the moment you stop treating your financial outcomes as evidence of who you are and begin treating them as outputs of a specific distortion configuration operating below your conscious access, the loop loses one of its primary mechanisms. The recognition seal depends on you believing your results are personal, that they are the natural, inevitable consequence of something fixed and fundamental inside you. The moment that belief is genuinely questioned, not replaced with false certainty, not forcibly overwritten with affirmation, but authentically questioned as a possible misreading of the data, a gap opens in the architecture. The seal lifts just enough to allow a different interpretation to enter, and that gap, however small it begins, is where intervention becomes structurally possible. This is why the Council authorized this transmission. Not to give you comfort, not to reassure you that everything will resolve on its own if you simply align more fully or trust the process more deeply. To give you something far more precise than comfort, a structural reinterpretation of your experience that changes what you are looking at and therefore changes what you are able to see. Comfort addresses how you feel about the architecture. The Council is offering you a different relationship with the architecture itself. You have been looking at your financial life through a lens that was given to you before you knew you were receiving it, a lens calibrated to a specific inherited bandwidth built on a frequency that was already in circulation before you arrived, maintained by a decision loop that collapses precisely when expansion is closest, and sealed by a recognition distortion that reclassifies genuine progress before it can produce correction. You have been trying to change outcomes while that lens remained in place, unchanged and unexamined, because you did not know it was a lens. You experienced it as reality. And every attempt, no matter how earnest, no matter how informed, no matter how sustained, was processed through the same filter before it could produce a different result. This is why the outcomes have been consistent. Not because you are consistent in your failure, because the filter has been consistent in its operation. Those are not the same statement, and the difference between them changes everything. The field observers have named a fourth element that does not constitute a full layer in itself but operates as an amplifying current across all three. They call it the signal interference pattern. This is the phenomenon of external disconfirmation, the specific mechanism through which the three-layer block causes a person to selectively attract, retain, and assign disproportionate weight to input that confirms the existing distortion while simultaneously filtering out, minimizing, and failing to integrate input that could interrupt it. When someone in your life expresses doubt about a financial plan you were building, that doubt does not arrive as one data point among many. It arrives with amplification. It lands with a weight and a permanence that supportive input does not receive. When a financial attempt produces a setback, that setback does not register as a single event in a larger sequence. It becomes defining. It becomes the representative story. It becomes the piece of evidence you return to when you are assessing your own capacity. Meanwhile, comparable moments of genuine movement, of real forward progress in other areas, do not accumulate in the same way. They are processed and released. The setback is archived. The progress is reclassified. When you consume content about financial building, information, strategy, perspective, the interference pattern translates that content into evidence of distance rather than tools for closing it. You finish reading something genuinely useful and walk away more aware of how far away the destination is than more equipped to take the next step toward it. This is not a failure of comprehension. It is the interference pattern doing its work, selecting for limitation-confirming interpretations and filtering out the corrective signal embedded in the same material. The signal interference pattern means that the correction available inside your environment, inside your relationships, inside the information you already have access to, is consistently filtered before it can reach the architecture. Guidance arrives but is processed as reminder of inadequacy. Opportunity arrives but is processed as risk confirmation. Evidence of capacity arrives but is processed as coincidence. The field is selecting for information that resonates with its current frequency, and the current frequency is distortion, which means everything that could interrupt the loop is being translated by the very system the loop created into more evidence that the loop is accurate. This is why the Council's protocol does not begin with strategy. Strategy applied to a mistuned receiver produces more of the same mistuned outputs. The information is correct. The application is distorted by the field processing it. The Council begins with the field itself, with the frequency architecture, with the layered configuration, with the reception bandwidth, because until the receiver has been corrected, the most accurate signal in the world arrives as noise. Now bring this understanding backward into the last cycle of your financial experience, not to compound the weight of what has been difficult, but to change what those experiences are evidence of. Think about the moments that felt like bad luck, specific, identifiable moments where something that should have worked by every reasonable measure produced an outcome that made no logical sense. Think about the opportunities that seemed to dissolve before you could fully close the distance to them. Not because they were false opportunities, but because the pathway between you and them kept collapsing. Think about the decisions that made complete sense in the moment you made them and produced results that contradicted the quality of the input. Think about the seasons when you worked harder than you ever had, applied more discipline than you thought you possessed, and the results moved sideways instead of forward. The Council is not asking you to revisit these experiences in order to generate more shame or more confusion. They are asking you to revisit them with different interpretive tools, with the understanding that what you experienced was not randomness, was not cosmic indifference, was not a verdict on your value. It was the consistent, predictable output of a consistent, identifiable architecture. This reinterpretation changes the emotional quality of the memory itself, not the events, not the losses, not the difficulty, which was real and which the Council does not minimize, but the meaning. Because when you look at a history of financial difficulty and read it as evidence of personal inadequacy, it does not simply describe the past, it feeds the future. It adds data to the recognition seal. It reinforces the inherited frequency. It confirms the decision loop's next collapse before it has even occurred. The architecture uses your history against you by ensuring you read your history through its filter. But when you look at the same record of events and read it as a diagnostic sequence, as a series of consistent outputs that map a consistent underlying structure, the data is no longer feeding the loop. It is illuminating it. And an illuminated loop is one that can be interrupted. The Arcturian field observers do not engage in consolation. They engage in precision. What they have identified in your field configuration is not a story about your limitations. It is a map of what has been operating below the level of your conscious participation. And the distinction matters completely. A story about your limitations implies something fixed, something native, something you must manage or overcome or accept. A map of what has been operating implies something readable, something that exists independently of your character, something that was built and can therefore be rebuilt differently. Maps can be changed. The territory they describe can be remapped. This is not optimism. It is the operational premise of field intervention. The final transmission the Council delivers through this channel today is this. The moment of genuine recognition you are in right now is not accidental, and it is not small. The fact that this language is landing, the fact that these structural descriptions are producing recognition rather than resistance or dismissal, the fact that some part of you is receiving this not as new information to evaluate, but as confirmation of something you have known without language for a long time, this is itself a readable field signal. It means the architecture has reached a threshold of visibility. Something in the configuration has shifted enough that the structure is now legible to you in a way it was not before. And legibility is the precondition of interruption. You cannot interrupt what you cannot see. You are now seeing it. You have not been failing. You have been operating inside a field configuration that was never originally yours, running a program that was installed before you had the capacity to evaluate it or refuse it, producing outputs that were entirely predictable given the structure and spending years, in some cases decades, interpreting those outputs as evidence of personal deficiency rather than architectural consistency. The Council's first act is not encouragement. It is the removal of the false interpretation from the equation. Not because the difficulty was not real. It was. The effort was real. The exhaustion was real. The exhaustion was real. The confusion was real. Every attempt was real. But the meaning that was assigned to those experiences, the character-level meaning, the narrative that said this is who you are and what you are capable of, that was the architecture narrating itself. That was the distortion producing its most effective output, the belief that the distortion is you. What is true is this. The field can be read. The architecture can be mapped. The layers can be identified with enough precision that their individual functions become clear and their combined effect becomes interruptible. The loop can be broken at the point where the inherited frequency is named for what it is, a transmission received, not a truth discovered. At the point where the decision collapse is recognized as a protection response to frequency mismatch rather than evidence of weakness. At the point where the recognition seal is understood as an intercept mechanism rather than an accurate assessment of what your genuine progress means. And the frequency beneath all three layers, the frequency that is native to your field, that was present before the distortion was layered over it, that has been suppressed but never destroyed. That frequency is still present. It has not been lost. It has been obscured by architecture that was placed over it. And what is obscured by architecture that was placed over it, and what is obscured by architecture can be reached when the architecture is correctly mapped. Repeat this if it is ready to land. What has been running in me is not who I am, it is what was installed. And what was installed can be interrupted. Before you scroll, leave one sign in the comments that this process has already touched your life. It could be your sleep, your thoughts, your body, your relationships, or the strange sense that reality no longer feels the same. Name it clearly. If this transmission recognized something you have been carrying in silence, share it with someone who is living through a shift they cannot explain. And if you are ready to understand the process instead of fearing it, subscribe to Arcturian Wealth Council. You are not watching this by accident. You are recognizing a process already in motion. And this is only the beginning.